Right. I'm hoping to see a couple of more people like Dave Cridland and Ben Kadak, but let me probably start slowly and just go through the admin bits, and then hopefully they can join us and catch up. So, welcome to the Kitten Working Group Interim. We didn't have a meeting for quite a bit. So I'm trying to both see how much interest there is in various topics, as well as kind of trying to synchronize where people are on some of them. In case you haven't seen me, I'm Alexei. If you are new to IETF, then please read note well. There is a bunch of other documents related to code of conduct, IPR issue, and stuff like that. I'm not going to, I don't really have time to recite all of them here. These are various documents that if you're not aware of, you probably should read. And the main things about code of conduct: treat colleagues with respect, speak slowly, avoid using slang and colloquial stuff, dispute ideas, don't attack people, use engineering judgment, find the best solution for the whole internet. Right. With that, this session is being recorded. We are using Meet Echo, which is online web-based platform. We have notes, which are linked here. There, I just discovered 5 minutes before the meeting that the link I used was not the same one used in Data Tracker. So I added a redirect there. Can I ask somebody to take notes? This doesn't have to be blow-by-blow discussion. That's just main points when there are discussions. No need to write down slides or text of presentation, just basically questions, answers. Who would like to volunteer before I volunteer somebody? Nadia, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. That would be great if you can take notes. Again, just skip the presentations if there are any questions after that, or if there are. Perfect. Excellent. I know both of you are will be speaking or presenting bits, so but I hope you can cover for each other. So thank you for that. With that, this is a roughly proposed agenda. I don't have timing of things, so I suspect the first part will take a bit longer, and then we'll have a smaller presentation. So today we'll basically be reviewing various stuff around so-called SASL2 that came out of XMPP Software Foundation, and whether there is enough interest in doing something like this in IETF, so it just doesn't just cover XMPP, but can be used more generally. I'll do a quick update on Scram two-factor authentication draft. We'll talk about fast reauthentication mechanism and quick update on OPAC SASL mechanism. So for the SASL2, actually, there are two presentations. There is a bigger one, and then Rick asked about shared key derivation, so he has a smaller one. So I know it's not something that necessarily was discussed in XSF, but I kind of grouped them together because they seem to belong together. We're not making decisions today what's going to be in SASL 2 and whether I will try to poll people whether there is enough interest to do something like SASL 2 in IETF. But again, this is just going to be a poll. We'll go on the mailing list and double check. With this, yeah, because I couldn't actually, so I added all the documents, related documents, which are IETF drafts as related documents to the meeting, but I couldn't add XSF because data tracker doesn't let me add arbitrary links. So I use some of the snapshots of these documents. My apologies, they might not be specific, latest version of what's in XSF. So I kind of got a snapshot. And they don't even point to XSF website. So just, but they should give you some idea if you want to further reading. And with this, I think Matthew will go into more details about various bits. Dave is not a dodgy URL, but I got it from somebody else. I know. Right. Okay, so Matthew, do you want to present your slide yourself? There is a share presentation button, or do you want me to drive them?
I've never presented on MeetEcho before, but I can give it a try. It would be handy to be able to manage my own slides.
There is a share, there is a preloaded slide thing, which is not share screen, it's like a document.
Okay.
Try that, and you can pick one of the for presentations. And if it doesn't work, then I can drive
it. This one. Nope. Is it the ask to share slides one?
Yes. Hold on. Okay. Do I need to approve it? I might need to approve it. Hold on. I need. Oh yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. Got it.
I need to. I cannot see the list of participants and chat at the same time, so I have to switch between. So yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
You got there.
You got there. Right. Yeah. So as Alexei was saying, we've been working on XMPP SASL 2 stuff over at the XSF. This started quite a while ago. We had an XMPP summit, I think it was 2016, 2017, and Dave Cridland wrote up a bunch of stuff that we'd been thinking about and invented some new things, basically to solve a whole range of issues. So we'll have a look at all of those. So XMPP uses SASL for authentication. That's defined in the core RFC. It's pretty much the same as any other protocol using SASL. We just do basic 64 encoding, but in XMPP, it's wrapped in XML. It's basically the only authentication method that we use these days. So it's implemented in every XMPP server, every XMPP client. In practice, everyone's using Scram SHA-1 mostly at the moment, and some deployments use plain for reasons. And so Dave Cridland wrote ZEP388, which is called the extensible SASL profile rather than SASL 2. I don't think SASL 2 actually shows up anywhere in writing because it could get confusing. Dave also wrote some initial implementations, and then it kind of sat for 5 years with no one in the community really interested in it. And then in 2022, I'm not sure what happened. The stars aligned. I got a grant to work on some stuff related to authentication and authorization, including two-factor auth and stuff like that. And so I immediately revisited this extensible SASL profile, and I thought, you know, this is exactly the foundation that I need. And then at the same time, I got speaking to XMPP client developers who are also interested in implementing some new stuff as well. So it's been the foundation for various new things that we've done in XMPP, which we'll go into next. So some of the changes are after authentication, so you do the usual SASL exchange, the server can offer the client, or rather request that the client perform some additional tasks. So these are sort of after authentication, but before it's actually completed. The other thing we added was stable client identifiers, so that the client can identify itself before it authenticates, and also channel binding negotiation. So we're still using SASL as it was, but we have all these things around it now, sort of bolted on. We've tried to, as much as possible, keep an open mind as to whether things will progress at the IETF and therefore, be adaptable to XMPP again. It's tricky, so there's lots of things to talk about there. So I think we'll have to have a discussion about that. So this is the traditional flow, which again will be familiar to anyone who's familiar with SASL in any other protocol. And so the new extensible version with the tasks adds the failure. So instead of success or failure, you can also have the server respond with a continue. And the continue contains a list of tasks, and the client must select one to proceed with authentication. And the tasks can be used for a range of things. And then we use the next element to say this is some task data from the client to the server. So we have that right? Yeah. Oops. So, for example, multi-factor authentication is an obvious place where this applies. So you provide credentials using your chosen SASL mechanism, and then the server replies, "Okay, but please provide me a one-time password," and that would appear as a task, like provide OTP or whatever. And then the client submits that using our next element with whatever format the specification says. And then we want to, so part of what I'm working on at the moment is trying to add in two-factor auth to XMPP in various ways. And this simple flow where you just provide an OTP is the nice, happy path, but there are lots of complicated ones where, for example, you have out-of-band challenges where you have to approve a push notification on your mobile device or things like that. And we also have the FIDO2 stuff, which is a whole other can of worms and pretty complicated. So in part of working on this, we changed some things about Dave's original draft. Rather than the challenge response within tasks, we changed to bi-directional any side can speak at any time thing, which we may or may not want to keep. The reason for this was in some cases we had the client waiting for the server to say that authentication could proceed, and in other cases we had the server waiting for the client to say, provide some information basically. So, for example, in SMS codes, you would want to wait. The server would wait for the client to provide the SMS code, and in the push notification example, the client would be waiting for the server to say that the user has successfully approved via whatever means. So the other thing to note about this is we changed from a simple base64 payload in the tasks to just structured XML. That was partly because I found that I was trying to shoehorn all this information about different tasks into something that could be serialized and then put into base64, and all this structured data it really fit nicely as XML. Obviously, we might not want to mandate XML for use in other protocols, but it's definitely something to think about how we could represent stuff in a nice way inside the tasks themselves. And I don't know whether that's something we want to standardize for all tasks, or maybe on a task by task basis and just say what the payload type is. So the other thing we did was client identifiers, and this is a new one we added. There are a few reasons we wanted to be able. So we have things like we have questions like which clients are trying to use these outdated SASL mechanisms like digest MD5 and such. And we didn't really have any kind of user agent pre-SASL in XMPP, so we wanted to include that along with the initial authentication. It's optional from the client's perspective, so it's up to them, what information they give. The second one was a stable unique identifier. So this is a UUID or something like that. And that was useful for for the server to know which tokens to compare with on the server side. So I think we're going to talk about that a bit later. This is using the SASL HT. I note that browsers are trying to deprecate user agent. I've tried to be mindful of that in the ZEP with the wording, like regarding privacy and so on. It's not quite the same because you are obviously only sending it to the party that you're authenticating to and so on. But yeah, I think there are definitely things that we could discuss there. So the unique identifier helps with various things, and it's similar to the authentication ID, except it's specific to one of a user's clients, and so the user can have multiple clients with different parameters. So one of the other things that we used the tasks mechanism for was, as I mentioned before, XMPP is very much stuck on Scram Shell 1. Servers have been storing hashed versions of credentials for a long time, and so we can't simply upgrade on the server side. And so one way to sort of upgrade to, say, SHA 256 is to ask the user to reset their password, but this is awkward. I think we do have a spec for that, but the user experience isn't great because they'll probably just, think, why can't I just enter the same password, that kind of thing. So we wanted to see if we could do something a bit more automatic with the cooperation of the client. And so we worked on defining these upgrade tasks, and this has mostly been the work of Thilo, who's on the call. And yes, that's a good point. The upgrade tasks avoid resending the password in the clear, which the password reset mechanism does. So these are just some examples. This is the interesting part. So this is a normal authenticate. So we're starting Scram authentication. The upgrade task that the client recognizes has been selected up front as well. That's so that after the credentials are verified, the server knows that the client supports this upgrade mechanism, because otherwise because the tasks are mandatory, the server should only send back upgrade mechanisms that the client is known to support and actually is able to complete. So I'll skip through most of these, but you can review the slides if you need to. So this is the client executing the upgrade task, providing the information, and then eventually we get the success response, which is the end of the normal SASL negotiation. The other thing that we've had in XMPP is we had Scram Plus widely-ish implemented, but we haven't really had much success with it on the network. I think it's used in pockets around and about, largely because we sort of introduced it just as TLS 1.2 was going away, and we had standardized on the TLS unique. I forgot the right way around. That was only defined for TLS 1.2 and not for TLS 1.3. So implementations have started now supporting TLS exporter, which is supported in TLS 1.3. However, because Scram doesn't include, for example, in the mechanism name or any advertisement about what channel binding methods the server supports, if the client picks the wrong one, then the authentication just fails, and the client doesn't really know why it failed and doesn't really know what other avenues it can take, like should it try again with a different channel binding mechanism or what. So this is a real problem that we've encountered, interoperability issues between clients and servers. And so we had to create this method where the server can advertise to the client which channel binding methods it supports. And this can change per connection depending on, for example, if the client connects with TLS 1.2 or 1.3. Also, Thilo has been working on channel binding negotiation downgrades, which I personally find very theoretical, given that it requires someone to be on the TLS channel, but I get there are use cases for that. So that basically involves various methods to have the client and server agree on what the client saw and what the server saw, and tie that into the to the Scrum negotiation. So yeah, this is defined in ZEP-474, which is new at the XSF. We don't have any server implementations currently, I think, but I think Thilo has worked on at least a client implementation, so we'll probably get to that soon. And that's more or less it. I hope I was on time. And yeah, so I think Alexi's list of specifications was a bit more complete and had links. But yeah.
Right, let's open the queue for questions. Ben?
Okay, is my audio okay?
Yes.
Great. So I guess we sort of started talking about this in the chat already, but when we were doing the TLS exporter channel binding type, my understanding was that the party that speaks first, which I think is the client here, would look at the TLS channel and say, if it's TLS 1.2, I will use the TLS unique channel binding type. And if it's TLS 1.3, I will use the TLS exporter. And so I was curious if you had some more insight about how that breaks.
I suspect that the client that I was dealing with, which I forget which one it was, because TLS exporter can technically be used on 1.2, I believe. I think that's what they were doing, but I'm not sure. I don't remember the details. This was at some point last year, so I can try and dig that up for you if you like, and figure out exactly what was going on.
I think it was in fact my client. I tried to use TLS exporter on eJBD for TLS 1.2 and it failed, if I recall correctly.
We
I think we tried to.
Sorry.
Yeah, and
we tried to put some text in the spec to have you not try to use TLS exporter when there is an existing ecosystem, but maybe that didn't work as expected.
Even if you put the TLS exporter things aside, some server setups can only provide TLS server endpoint or some such. And if I have such a server, it would be better to do this TLS server endpoint channel binding instead of the not supported TLS exporter than nothing. So if I don't have any negotiation, I can only do TLS exporter or nothing, but not the server endpoint stuff.
Right. Okay, Dave?
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking of. I just remembered. So we had a server that was doing server endpoint, and then yeah, it kind of falls apart with that negotiation.
I was just going to reiterate that as I said in chat, the XMPP community has used channel binding quite heavily, more heavily, I think, than most other communities of this kind of nature. I've never seen it in email, for instance. But it means that we've experienced cases where TLS exporter is great, That came out of the XMPP community, indeed. There is some use of the endpoint as well, and that is often the only thing that's possible if you have early TLS termination. And we also have plenty of experience in cases where you can't use any channel binding at all because the client is, for example, a web client where there is no channel binding data available. So I think there is a need for negotiation, even though it's not the ideal situation in a purist sense.
So one other thing, I note that the SASL HT mechanisms encode the channel binding method into the mechanism name, which may or may not be the right way of doing it, but that does solve it for that set of mechanisms, which has been useful, I can say.
Right. It's a good reminder that if we are going to take on all of this work, we'll need to make sure it's all kind of makes sense together. Okay. Any other questions? Do people feel enthusiastic about SASL 2? I know we probably have majority of XSF on the call, but I'm still interested to see whether other people seem it's a interesting collection of ideas, and we don't necessarily have to take all of them. But if anybody wants to speak up.
Actually, Alexi, if I could just make one other comment.
Sure.
I did spend a little time sketching out, but not publishing because I didn't get around to it, an idea for taking most of what was then SASL 2, which was in effect the previous version of the spec, but wrapping that up such that you had a nested SASL profile within what we badly call SASL 1. So
we did actually talk about this like 5 years ago. Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Well,
again,
this might be just one way of kind of implementing this.
But it would mean that there isn't necessarily such a major breaking change. I'm not suggesting we even need to do one or the other. We can do both if we want the features of SASL 2, but the extensibility in particular. But that would give you the mechanisms. It would give you tasks, and I think it would also potentially give you some of the additional parts that Matthew and Thilo have added, like client identifiers and things like that.
Right. Sounds good. Okay, let's move on. I grouped with this one more presentation, so Matthew, if you can let go of the control, excellent. Right, Rick, do you want to come in and try to? Yeah. Yeah, I can see slides now. One thing that occurred to me is that actually some of the reauthentication stuff can possibly be done from key derivation if we had a facility for saying that, an extended SASL profile, if there is a SASL mechanism that satisfies it and it has key derivation function at the end of authentication, it can be used for authentication, for example. And I think Rick will talk about other cases that he had in mind. Please go ahead.
needs to enable his audio stream.
Yes, I just saw a message from Rick. Well, I can show you. You can flip through your slides, but I'm afraid you kind of need to explain them. What we can try to do is, Rick, maybe you can try to disconnect and reconnect and see if you can sort out your audio.
Now I think it's working.
Yes, now I can hear you, so perfect.
Maybe we should do the slides instead. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I tested beforehand.
That's all right.
Could you share the slides then?
I can share your slides, yes.
So this is mostly an idea, just a thought that came up. With Cecil, we usually don't use the security layer, but that's because we consider it encryption when it's used in a protocol that's enforced. I think there's a very potent possibility because Cecil protocols usually run over TLS. And TLS basically does Diffie-Hellman encryption, and the Diffie-Hellman public key or keys are signed with a public key. Diffie-Hellman, as far as I know, does not have a quantum proof alternative. So that basically means that all TLS stuff is at risk of being cracked by a quantum computer, and that's a big problem. Usually what's being done then is to look for some entropy to mix that with the Diffie-Hellman key exchange so that you get something that's at least also needs the secret to be known as well as the cracked Diffie-Hellman key. Cecil usually has entropy, a secret that's shared by the two endpoints already, and it uses that to derive authentication. But if you could also derive a key, you might mix that with whatever you're doing at a transport, for example, your TLS, and to benefit from that. And one place where this came up is when I looked into Opaque, which has a great possibility for extracting key material, but to use that for encryption is a bit silly if you run it over TLS. But to use it for all sorts of other purposes, I think in general is a useful purpose. So I added this to a spec that I wrote. It's a different example. It's not TLS. Next slide, please. This is realm crossover. Basically, a client on the left and a remote domain, which is their domain, where they have an account. They exchange a key, and they do that beforehand. And with that, an end-to-end encryption tunnel can be set up, and SX over Plus does exactly that. It passes plain SSL authentication inside the tunnel. The client program will pass it to wherever the server is, some third party that doesn't know about the account. It mentions the domain name, and then with that, SSL can be ported back to the client's domain, to the remote domain, over diameter, and that basically the SSL tokens are passed back and forth until the domain says either it's rejected or it's accepted as this user identity. Next slide, please. So this can be done with just about any protocol. It's basically just SSL used in an awkward way, in a different way, but can be done with all SSL mechanisms and basically all SSL protocols. It just sits in between. This is one of the most wild examples that I have thought of and that I think might be really cool to use. And that is when you go to a cafe or something, you want to use the Wi-Fi. Why not use SSL to log on to it? Extract the key, have that key delivered back alongside with the diameter stuff, and use that to have your local Wi-Fi connection secured, and then pass on the traffic to your home network where you have an IP address in your home network, so that nobody really is bothered by oh gosh, I'm giving away bandwidth. because it's not within their IP range, or anything scary you might be doing is not of the responsibility of the IP address owner. This is just an idea, just a possible application. I think there are many more, including, of course, the plain encryption security layer stuff that's sometimes used. But in general, I think the entropy that we have in the secrets that we share with SASL can be a very useful benefit in a time that we have quantum computers and need some form of entropy to be able to derive all sorts of things. So that's why I'm basically saying it could be very useful to use that and think about key extraction mechanisms for SASL methods. That's what I wanted to share.
Comments, questions? Yeah, Dave, go ahead.
I put this in the chat anyway, but when you say Diffie-Hellman, I assume we really mean elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, probably,
Yeah,
possibly discrete logarithm Diffie-Hellman, which ironically is slightly more secure against quantum computing, as I recall, probably because it's bigger. But there are other Diffie-Hellman possibilities. I know that there's been at least one quantum proof version thrown around based on lattices. I'm no cryptographer.
okay.
So in principle, all of the post-quantum or quantum proof problems can be addressed at the TLS layer by changing the Diffie-Hellman, whatever it is. It's a generative group or something like that, isn't it? But that mechanism.
Okay, that's news to me. I'm very happy with that. I still think that, so that basically says that this example might not be applicable. I still believe that in general, since we have the entropy available, or at least the secret available that's shared between the two parties, it's cryptographically beneficial to be able to extract key material from that, especially with something like opaque that is so very good at doing that. But that's, yeah.
Yeah, my as I mentioned quickly, my use case is a bit different. Is for the authentication, you can extract, if you have key derivation in both Scram and OPEC, then you just say create the authentication token using key derivation, and you say it's in generic way, and then the authentication mechanism can be used with either of them. Basically, that's the benefit I see. So kind of glue that can be used for multiple things.
Yeah, indeed, for multiple things. Also, the hash token might also benefit from it.
All right. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you.
I think that's now me. I will very quickly. Okay, so we had this. I will quickly do update on Scram two-factor authentication. I just done it last week. Simon, so initially I added TOTP that was basically stolen from Dave Kirtland's Zap. So thank you for that. And then Simon Josephson said, well, what about FIDO 2 or FIDO stuff for, working with USB devices, NFC, Bluetooth low energy and stuff like that. So basically, I think he mentioned it last summer. It took me a couple of months to actually go through various specs to figure out what it was all about. It's quite a comprehensive framework in itself for authentication. And yeah, I basically was slowly working on it. You can see details in the document. If you dealt with FIDO stuff in any of your projects, if you can read what I wrote and double check whether it makes sense and whether it's detailed enough. If you haven't but want to give it a try. Also, try to implement from what I wrote and see if it works. And let me know, obviously. So the other bit that I already had in the document was reauthentication token. Basically, I was thinking about, it's nice to have SASL2 framework, but if you are using a different protocol and it's not available, and if deployment will take 5 years, maybe I'm a bit pessimistic, but then I would like to have in-band way for returning reauthentication token. And basically there is an attribute for this, and then this authentication token can be used directly with HT SASL mechanisms without any protocol machinery for requesting them explicitly. And then basically if client, so server will return one of these. If clients wants to do quick reauthentication, recognize this extension, it will use the token, and then we'll use HT mechanism after that. So yeah, have a read. Let me know whether it's understandable. If you want to cut and paste the text to any of your documents, feel free. Okay. And then just quickly to introduce next talk, I just want to, why do we care about fast reauthentication? Just to make sure that we're all on the same page. I think a lot of applications either need to reauthenticate quite often because they get disconnected and they just want to do it without prompting user for the password. But also some of them use multiple connections in parallel. Because there is quite a lot of drive to use multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, can you imagine that every time you reconnect, you get a prompt for SMS? This will drive users crazy. So I think the idea here is once you authenticated and did two-factor authentication, you can get reauthentication token, and then you will do quick reauthentication mechanism that firstly, it will bypass two-factor authentication, and second, it will be just one round trip, so it will be quicker to do and probably will be less CPU intensive than do full scram or pack exchange. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, lovely developments. I'm always a bit afraid of reauthentication. We've seen at TLS that it's very difficult to do it well, and then becomes a problem. But I have, on another path, I've tried to embed SASL in HTTP, as you've tried before, and I'm now trying. And yes, it drove me mad to have to log on with every different page or with every TLS connection drop, because there, of course, it might happen any time that you need to set up a new connection. So yeah, that would definitely be beneficial to have fast reauthentication. Right.
And the way it works, server can decide that it will allow reauthentication for like so many times or for a certain period of time, and then at some point it can reject, and then it will force the client to reauthenticate, using the original mechanism or similar mechanism. So yeah, it's another component in the toolbox, basically. Okay. So with that introduction, Dave, yeah?
Yeah, sorry. Just as a general comment on fast reauthentication tokens, obviously the token is very very high risk. If someone obtains that token, there's been a number of HTTP-based session token stealing attacks recently. Circle CI and LastPass were both of that nature, I believe. And so obviously, there is a lot of risk in these tokens. I think it's very important that the token issuing is also combined with a token listing and other token management and token revocation solutions that are available to the user. Now, I know that the original designs around HT that Florian did, maybe Florian can talk about them more, around ISR, for instance, in the XMPP world, also included the ability to track which devices were in use by the user, or which had a token. I believe that was all part of it, and I think that's a lot of the driving force. Maybe Matthew and Thilo will correct me, but I think that's a lot of the driving force behind having device identifiers in the new SASL 2. So I would be very hesitant about handing out tokens without suitable tracking and management.
Yeah, that is one big reason that we added the identifiers.
Okay, sounds good. Right, I'll give Florian opportunity to present.
Mic check, is this thing on?
Yes.
Okay, I turn on my video also. This should also work. Unfortunately, my camera is to the right, so my left side will be a mystery for you. And I'm going to try to share some slides. I requested to share slides. I think you have to approve it. Okay. Okay, I can only check this pre-selected slides. Okay, so hello, I'm Florian. Thanks for having me. And I think I have to continue with the tradition of disappointing Dave by saying that the ISR step actually has no mechanism for tracking or managing tokens. But I agree that something like that would be nice to have, certainly. With that, I'm going to talk about the hash token SASL mechanism. And I start with its origin story. And the original motivation is a XApp I wrote also many years ago. That seems to be a common topic today. That's called instant stream resumption. And instant stream resumption is actually motivated by XMPP's long reconnect delay. I gave a talk at FOSDEM 2015 about that, but the gist of it is that there's like a 2 to 3 seconds delays that you always have until the XMPP session is usable, using techniques that were available back then. And this was probably fine in the non-mobile age, but today with mobile devices that encounter frequent reconnects, we have to do better. So initially, the SASL HT mechanism was part of this ISR specification. And I think it was Dave who encouraged me to outfactor the SASL parts into an extra ID and to put it into the Kitten working group for review and comments. And of course, I'm always happy about feedback. The current state of the ID is a working draft, and there's probably many things that can be improved. So what is SASL HT? It's a very simple SASL mechanism for Bureau tokens. And the basic idea is just to be a little bit better than using SASL plain. So you obfuscate the actual token by using an HMAC construct. you can borrow some ideas from Scram to get mutual authentication. And if you mix in channel binding, that's always a good idea. Channel binding was initially mandatory in the ID, but Matthew and Thilo asked me to also add support for a channel binding-less flavor. And the reason is web clients. So below on the slide, you see SASL HT score, which is a very simple construct. The idea was to don't have multiple SASL round trips because we want fast or instant authentication, basically. So the current situation is the ISR XAP, and by that I also mean the HT mechanism was written before TLS 1.3 was standardized. And back then there was a lot of buzz about TLS 1.3 early data. And when I looked at it, it appeared as a good fit for SASL HT's first message to shove this message into TLS early data. But I think it was Nadia who pointed out that TLS requires, that early data requires the usage of a pre-shared key. So the ID currently talks a little bit about early data, but I basically think that it's not really what you want to do. If you want really fast re-authentication, you could also think about using TLS PS key and maybe SASL external. I'm not sure if it would work. I'm not absolutely sure if it would work on a technical perspective. So this is something one has to figure out. But I've looked at various TLS PSK implementations and their APIs, and I think it looks promising and doable. But if those ingredients are not available, not every TLS library may provide support for PSK, then you can always fall back to performing a SASL HT, which should always work because it doesn't require anything from the TLS library and from the TLS layer if you don't do channel binding. So, well, more or less, unfortunately, my instant stream resumption XAP did not catch on. However, we see there's currently much traction in the XMPP community for an alternative XAP, that's XAP Fast by Matthew and Thilo, and that also uses SASL HT. And whatever gets us fast reconnects is what we should do, because that's something mobile XMPP users certainly suffer from. So with that, I thank you for your attention.
And confirm to jump in and confirm the TLS 1.3 early data PSK usually comes from a previous handshake. It doesn't have to be an external configured PSK.
I'm sorry, was this a statement or a question? I didn't catch it.
It was a statement, and
Okay.
I just want to make sure the way you described it sort of swept that part under the rug. So I wanted to make sure that the whole audience knew that.
So maybe I can, since we have many knowledgeable people here, using, for example, Alexei's O attribute to obtain a token. Could I feed this token into the TLS PSK and use SASL external? Would that be feasible?
I think that the protocol pieces are all there. You would have to ensure that the token you get has the right amount of entropy and whatnot. It doesn't have any like identifiable personal data or something that's in the clear. But I think at the protocol level, that would work.
Okay, that's something I'm considering looking into.
Okay.
your server-side implementation would be a little bit complicated to hook the pieces together, where you're looking to your database of issue tokens in the TLS layer as the pre-shared keys. But I think that most implementations would at least give you the rope to build that, even if it's a bit clunky to do.
The only thing I'm not sure about is if TLS PS key requires some sort of identifier for the PS key, so that you can provide the identifier and the secret key.
I guess you do need to have something like that, but you can always have a convention based on issuing them together from the O attribute, or naming or using the identifier as a hash with some other named data and whatnot.
Okay.
Quick question: why shove the token into the PSK if you could just use the TLS 1.3 mechanism to generate the PSK for the early data in the first connection, and then use early data in having the token in the early data in the second connection? That wouldn't be that complicated.
So you basically suggesting we should retrieve the token from the TLS stack and not from some Scram mechanism.
You generate a random token, store that on the server, and this is the first TLS connection. So this generates the PSK for the second connection using early data. And then in this early data, you just send over the random token the client and server agreed upon in the first connection. And this authenticates the client to the server in the second connection. Wouldn't that also work?
I think it becomes a little bit harder to make workable because the early data in TLS 1.3 is considered part of the application stream. And so you need your application to have a protocol spec saying this is how we're going to use the early data to do that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Guys,
Okay.
sorry, can I I'm just mindful that there are 2 minutes left and some people will disappear at the end of this. That's a great discussion. I wish we have more time. Can I move to the last slide? I just want to kind of figure out what the next steps are, whether we want another, meeting, et cetera, et cetera. So let me just quickly do this. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping to the very end. We don't need to decide on any specific technical details here. What I would like to know if first there is enough interest to work on reauthentication mechanism in the kitten, to take it to the kitten and try to adopt it as a document and do this work. And then also if people are interested in starting SASL2 type draft, which is more generic than just XMPP, and again, try to adopt it in Kitten. Would people be willing to work on these and interested in progressing this? If you can just speak on audio or in the chat, either way is fine.
I can say that the two-factor auth in Scram, while clever, probably doesn't satisfy my requirements as is. I don't know. it does tie us to obviously it doesn't tie us specifically to Scram. The same thing can be done and repeated in other mechanisms, but it does, for example, rule out using plain and then using two-factor auth, which some deployments in XMPP definitely do have plain, and I can't see that changing anytime soon.
I think I propose we kind of pursue both. For people who couldn't wait for SASL2, there is an example how to do this with Scram, and it works for OPAC as well because of the same syntactic structure. But I'm definitely up to working on the SASL, two-factor within the SASL2 framework. Does it answer your question?
Sounds good, yeah.
Obviously, I mean, this is just my proposal. I cannot do a proposal as a chair of the working group. I'm still trying to get consensus whether there is enough interest. But I'm sensing there is enough interest, but I kind of want some kind of confirmation.
Yeah, I think I'm in a similar boat where the Scram dedicated two-factor auth is potentially useful for some cases, but I would prefer to have the two-factor support be sort of more generic. And,
sure.
And so the bits about doing a slimmed down SASL2 that would include the two-factor stuff seems a little bit more appealing to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me I probably will implement both, but in short term, I probably need something quick that doesn't, because I will need to make this work in SMTP, IMAP, and LDAP probably, which is probably quite a bit more work than, and first we need to define what SASL2 is, right? More details. Okay, any other comments? Yes, Dave, we can always layer another thing on top of another layer, another thing. All right. Thank you all. Nadia, I'm sorry we kind of ran out of time for OPAC. Would people be interested in another interim meeting in a couple of months? Or should I start, shall we start with adoption calls first for reauthentication mechanism, for example? Okay, so possible interim on OPAC. I'll follow up with various people, and let's see if we can do some progress on what we've done, and also we can have a discussion on OPAC as well. Okay, sounds good. Thank you all. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right.
You too.
All right, see you around.
Alexei, will the room stay open if you leave?
I'm not sure. It might not.
Okay. Thilo, Nadia, shall we switch to another venue? Or everyone interested, of course.
I'm probably interested as well, but I'm not sure how long I can stay.
Same. Okay, Thilo, would you be so kind and paste the link? And Alexei, would you wait until Thilo has posted the link in the chat?
Sure.
Thanks.
Already added.
Alexei, as an obscure question, if we are moving to a BBB server, I assume that the note well no longer apply, or does it?
Well, how likely of a problem this is going to be?
Well, very little, hopefully. But if it is a problem, then it becomes a massive problem.
Well, if you guys having a discussion on another server going to introduce IPR, this IPR still need to be disclosed when you bring this work to the IETF. So
This
hopefully
is true.
it's so.
Here it is. Okay, see you over there.
Okay then.
See you. Bye.
All right, see you guys. Thank you
Right,
for
see you.
coming.